Why don't you start by telling me a bit about Cybermindz and your role there, Richard?
Yeah, sure. Cybermindz is a new not-for-profit, been around for about a year now, and we're working across the cybersecurity sector in the mental health space, promoting awareness about mental health, wellbeing, about the high rates of stress and burnout that are occurring in the sector. But more than just raising awareness, we have facilitators trained in a resilience protocol called IREST, or integrated restoration, which is an evidence-based technique which is having profound effects in assisting people manage their emotional responses, their reactions, their stress levels as they continue to in their role to protect us all in their cyber roles.
Sounds brilliant. And you mentioned that you're looking at the mental health of security professionals, and mental health statistics are notoriously difficult to capture. Could you give the listeners some sort of idea about the breadth of mental health issues within security professionals currently?
Yeah, sure. Anecdotally, we had heard, as many have, the high rates of stress and burnout occurring in the sector. So what Cybermindz did with the input of one of our directors is Dr. Andrew Reeves, who's a psychologist, organisational behavioural psychologist, who also has a background in cyber. So he put together a number of metrics that already have an Australian baseline for the general population, and also a baseline for specific industries such as the healthcare industry in Australia. And we've had over 170 individuals from the cyber industry respond to that survey now. And the metrics they responded to were a collection of three different metrics, including the Maslach Burnout Index, sleep quality, and professional efficacy. And what we're able to do was to quantify that this anecdotal discussion that we've heard about the stress and burnout is real, and that not surprisingly, but unfortunately, it is confirmed that against all of the metrics that we recorded, individuals were at the high end, and of particular concern were some of the ratings were also predictive of potential high levels of burnout and potential leading indicators that members might be looking to change positions to avoid those high stress levels.
It's very concerning. What is the level of organizational awareness of these type of statistics, especially at the executive layer?
Some of the response, I think, is that everybody's stressed. Some of these roles are inherently stressful, and that people just need to get on with it. But I think with changes in legislation around there's changes in legislation recently that psychological injury has now an increased focus, and that now we have this measurable data that confirms these concerns, that it's now gaining greater traction. And I think boards and managers have always been concerned about this, but now we've got the data to confirm this. It can just reiterate, confirm this trend, put some hard data on it, so we can then just have an ongoing conversation about what we can do about it.
Yeah, and as a data professional, I really see the value of being able to quantify and measure those sort of things. On a separate side, me as a data professional, I think there's a certain perception there is about data scientists, and I don't necessarily think I fit that certain mold. I'm quite sociable, and I see all different types of data scientists with different types of personalities. Is there risks of organizations developing things like stereotypes around security professionals, how they like to interact, how they raise issues?
Yeah, certainly. We've been sort of very careful not to just tell a negative story here, and not to raise alarm, because we've had a lot of discussions amongst sort of early entrants to the sector and also students. And we know that if we're just telling a bad story about the stresses, it can actually cause people to not proceed with this career, or even we're hearing students choosing other subjects and not proceeding with their cyber studies. So we're very cognizant of that, and we're here to just identify what the stresses are. But our main purpose of doing the research is just to measure, but measure sort of before and after the training that we're delivering, so we can confirm that we are making a difference in the resilience training that we are then bringing to organisations. We're here for the positive message that there are stresses in the industry, and the particular stresses we're noticing when we're talking across the sector, once we've done these surveys, is an inability to switch off, the relentless threat environment, fear of the consequences of failure, fear of letting others down, feeling a lack of support, feeling a lack of isolation, and a lack of power and influence regarding changing this environment is what the cybersecurity professionals are telling us, which are different from the other sectors out there, such as the data scientists.
It's interesting because there is a lot of data and studies on what is the right level of stress, because sometimes if you have no stress in a role, it's a bad thing. You're not motivated to necessarily hit certain deadlines or be productive. And it sounds like that you're starting to separate out what's considered good stress and what's considered bad stress in a way.
Yeah, you raise an interesting point there that, some level of stress is important and necessary for us to perform at our peak level. And when it comes to the definitions of stress, that's often called eustress. To perform at the optimal level, there needs to be that right level of challenge to get us working at the right level. And there's even a thing called leader-induced stress, where the leader might put the worker under a little bit of stress to get them to that level. But our biology is designed to only work at that level for certain intervals of time, and not ongoing levels where it actually becomes detrimental to our work performance, our concentration, our mental abilities. Significantly interferes with creativity and insight, and obviously is very detrimental to the health of the body when there's those ongoing release of the stress chemicals, cortisol and such.
And you touched on something briefly before, which is interesting, which is the remuneration aspect. And often you see organizations, they will inflate salaries and do those types of things for higher stress roles, which can be good in some ways because it can afford you a better style of living in terms of the gyms that you go to, the sort of food that you eat, but it can be quite a two-dimensional view of the problem. Do you see a lot of organizations trying to default to things like remuneration to solve these issues?
The organisations, and including the government sector, the federal and state levels, and the private sectors, and the various university sectors are all competing for the same talent, so they're considering these different options. Interestingly, those extrinsic motivators are often, the research confirms, not as beneficial as the intrinsic motivators, as far as a sense of purpose, working for a good team. So it's interesting that when it comes to stress and burnout, that our protocol, actually, one of the steps is reminding a person what it feels like when you're living in alignment with your sense of purpose, and reflecting on purpose and mission, because that is an inoculating factor which can allow a person to work through short periods of high levels of stress when they have that sense of purpose. So yes, balancing these extrinsic motivators such as salary, the work environment, the climate in which people work, with giving them a sense of intrinsic motivators as far as a sense of purpose is very important as well.
And how do some organizations do this well with their intrinsic motivators? Do they do workshops? Do they adopt certain management techniques? Are there ways that you see success in organizations improving their intrinsic motivation to help combat stress?
This is sort of getting a bit outside of what the focus of Cybermindz is, but nevertheless, interesting conversation to have. But I think as Cybermindz continues to work with different organisations, we're going to learn a lot about what the best practice is in across the industry, and it's an area that we are very interested in monitoring, gaining an expertise in, and sharing best practice across the sector.
I guess one of the things is, and having a look at your website, is getting cyber professionals to help support each other as well.
Yes, yeah. So this sense of building a community where people can check in and normalising the conversation about the stresses in the industry, just honest, vulnerable, authentic conversations about the challenges people face. That itself, and just that camaraderie and the collegial approach can itself be beneficial for people to share the challenges they have, and then amongst themselves talk about how they can manage that stress, be it steps they can take as individuals to manage that stress, or organisational things they can do in the workplace to mitigate some of the challenges.
I guess when you look at a lot of different mental health organizations, that concept of you are not alone, this is not something that's unique to you, is quite important in just giving validation around some of the concerns that people might have.
Yeah, absolutely. That sense of isolation that many of the cyber professionals have, given that, when they're doing their job right, they might be protecting us from thousands of attacks every week. But when things go right, no one hears about it. But when things go wrong, it's when they very much the consequences of that failure are very high and often widely reported in the media and within the organisation.
Yeah. I think as a nation, we're getting much better at this, and we've got things like Are You OK Day, for instance, that you ask somebody, are they okay? And during COVID, there was a lot of organizations that did things like social catch-ups on Fridays over Zoom, not talking about work, but to decrease some of those isolation instances. But are there sort of indicators of knowing when someone's in trouble? Are the things that professionals maybe should look out for?
This certainly is, and having people in the workplace trained as mental health first aiders is also something that a lot of workplaces are adopting now. So having that level of a network of people is an important thing to do. And all of us now, I think there's an increase, obviously post-COVID, and increased awareness of these psychological stresses, but certainly a strong team environment. Certainly when people are working remotely, there's an extra challenge in achieving that. But checking in on people, asking how they're doing, scale of 1 to 10 is also things that we can do.
If somebody thinks there's a problem, and this might be outside of the scope of what Cybermindz does, but are there certain steps in terms of approaching that person, knowing when they should escalate? How should someone, if generally deal with that sort of problem?
The suggested approach is just to give people the opportunity to talk, ask open questions, check in with people, have a general conversation, bring things up just as part of conversation. Giving people just the opportunity to explain what they're going through can itself be of benefit. And then, if asked, appropriately, empathetic questions to get people talking further, perhaps, asking direct questions if people are concerned about the stresses people are going through.
In cybersecurity and mental health, are there any parallel learnings from other high stress professions like police or fire and rescue, or things that get implemented into, because there are numerous professions that have similar high stress scenarios where mental health is very well studied. Is there any parallel learnings that are implemented into cyber?
Cybermindz, when we were looking at what we could actually do to assist to cyber professionals to manage their stress, the protocol that we looked at was this integrated restoration IRS protocol that's been used by the United States military for over 15 years and been used for several years within the Australian military as well. Actually was developed at the Walter Reed Military Hospital in the United States for the servicemen who were suffering high rates of post-traumatic stress, and has been used for building resilience as well. So we've looked at this protocol, and this is the main tool that we're now using as part of our programs, where we work with organisations, and over 8 weeks, just 1 hour a week, we take them through this guided protocol. So this is an evidence-based technique informed by the latest understandings of neuroplasticity and psychological stress on the body, and incorporates various techniques, 10-step guided protocol, and very much informed by its success in the military, but beyond the military has been used by many other stressed populations, survivors of various types of trauma, chemical dependency, the homeless. And whilst it's had wide success, the brilliance of this technique is really it meets people where they're at. And since it's a guided protocol, the benefits can be gained straight away, rather than there's a technique that people need to learn.
How do organizations, how do they evaluate the effectiveness of these sorts of programs? Do they redo the original survey and compare post and pre metrics, or are there other ways that they do evaluation?
Yes, we are very much interested in knowing that our program itself works and demonstrating to the people we're working with that this is the case. So there's a survey that we ask the participants to do before and after the 8-week program, and we can also then follow that up 3 months or 6 months later to measure the effectiveness of the program.
Good. Well, it sounds like that your organization's doing some great work, that people are getting connected, they're sharing experiences, there's metrics, there's workshops. So are you optimistic that Australia's heading in the right direction with mental health and cybersecurity?
The support that we're receiving has been amazing across the sector, and the various associations that support the cyber sector as well. So we are consistently encouraged by the conversations we're having that it's moving in the right direction. But I think that recognition and that support is also confirming that more needs to be done there, and that this is an important thing to do. So very much encouraged. The feedback we're having, even from the session 1 of the 8-week programs we're doing, is just amazing. People are reporting that they've had the best night's sleep they've had in months after doing just a single session of the IRS protocol. So it's encouraging, and we're here to say that there are these various techniques that can greatly assist in reducing and managing levels of stress, but continued the raising awareness and continued reinforcement to do something, rather than just soldering on and expect things will be all right, and that in the long term you'll avoid burnout. I think the conversation needs to continue.